Hello and welcome to Real Estate Real Talk. My name is Haleigh Bower and I'm joined today by Latonya Button, coming to you live from Aggieland as we discuss the ins and outs of buying and selling real estate. The purpose of this podcast is to help educate you on how the different real estate processes work, as well as equip you as the buyer or seller to ask great questions to your agent. So let's get started. Thank you for joining us today. We will be discussing what happens after all the signatures are in place and we have an executed contract. So Latonya, talk to me about what happens when you have the buyer's signature in place. What happens next?
Okay, so we have the buyer's signature in place, and now I'm going to send a copy of the contract along with the financing addendum and the pre-approval letter to the listing agent. So I usually text the listing agent and say, hey, I've got an offer. It's coming. It's on its way, just to make sure that they're expecting it. And they will confirm receipt. So then the listing agent, they'll present the offer to the seller, and they'll take time to review it and typically do one of three things. So they'll either accept it and just sign it. So it'll be a contract, it's in place, we're ready to go, and everything. But secondly, they may counter. So if they counter, it's kind of like passing a basketball back and forth. So if they counter, buyer is off the hook, goes back to the buyer, and they can discuss whether they want to accept that or counter that themselves. So there's a little bit of back and forth there.
Yeah.
So, or third, they could reject the offer and just say, look, we were not able to accept this offer at this time. If you would like to present another offer, that will be fine and we'll review it.
Yeah, and that's worst case. That means you've offended them.
Well, sometimes it just means that you're a little too far off, and it's possible that there's a multiple offer situation and they don't want to be tied up in the passing the basketball back and forth, and so they'll say, hey, we'll let you come back if you would like to, but then they can accept other offers at that time as well.
Right, right. Okay, so we have everything in place with the contract. Next is the option period. What is the option period and what happens during that time?
Okay, so just to backtrack a minute. So we have that earnest money, and it's been delivered to the title company, and that option check for this period of time is delivered to the listing agent. Then we're ready to roll. But So the option period is the time for the buyer to have the property inspected. So they don't have to have it inspected, but we encourage them to do that so that they know everything about their home. And during this option period, it can be anywhere from, I've seen it 5 to 10 days. This is the time they want to get started on that. So usually, depending on the kind of property, there's usually 3 inspections: general inspection, HVAC inspection, and wood destroying insect inspection. So most of the time, if you have a really good realtor like Haleigh and I, then you're able to get it done all at one time and at that same time. So that way it gets all done at the same time. But keep in mind, you want to get your inspections done as soon as possible. I know Haleigh talked about that last podcast, but we want to make sure that it's the very beginning.
Yeah, like day one if possible.
Yeah, usually day one when they're signing, I'm texting the inspectors to see, do they have availability the next day or the next to fit in, because they get, especially during the busy time, it gets really busy, and then depending on what time of day. And some of them, they also have to schedule, if you've got a property that's rural, they may inspect the well and get a water sample, and that's important, or the septic, and that takes longer. Some agents have a husband and wife team. Some inspectors have a husband and wife team, and others work alone. So it takes some time in their schedule to provide that time. So the buyer, they can be present if they would like, the buyer and the agent, but they don't have to if they don't want to. And then, so they will go through and do a very, very detailed report. It's long. It could be 20 pages when you get it back. And that's on even a newer house.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's usually the next day or so that it comes back, right?
Yeah. And then, at the end of the report, they usually have a summary. So it's really important to, if you can, start at the bottom and see what it is, and then use the rest of the pictures and things like that for reference. But your agent, they're going to go ahead and look it over too and see if anything jumps out, and you're going to look at it. But sometimes something, hopefully nothing big comes up, right?
Hopefully not. Yeah. But if it does, talk to me about what happens next if something like super, super scary comes up.
Right. So we typically, as the agent, we're kind of like, okay, let's take a deep breath. This is typical inspection. A lot of times the roof, HVAC, it can all, it's not a surprise.
Foundation problems.
I've had some homes that had all of the above. Really bad inspection. But the first thing that we do is just review it, kind of take a deep breath, and then if they recommended getting a roofer, that's what we'll do. We'll, get a roofer recommendation, come out, look at it. Maybe the seller, maybe it's covered because it has hail damage and they didn't realize it, right? So that's something. Maybe it's the HVAC and the buyer wants to get a second opinion.
Yeah. So, and just depending on where you're at in that process, you may need to add a couple of days to your option period, and you might be able to do that just depending on what kind of seller you're working with. But
right, and as long as the it's really important, of course, the communication between the listing agent and the buyer's agent. Right. So, as long as they're communicating and saying, "Look, we're working on this. We've got some issues with the roof. We want to have a roofer come out," and then maybe they want to have their roofer come out. Right. Yeah. So that's the time period that's going. But it's important that you take, even though you have 10 days, that you don't wait the full 10 days to come to the seller with whatever you're requesting.
Right.
You want to give some time so that the seller can then respond, right, and figure out how they're going to handle the situation. Because it is negotiation back and forth.
Yeah. So let's say you've negotiated back and forth. It's something pretty scary. The seller's not willing to fix it. The buyer is in a state of mind where if the seller doesn't fix this super scary thing, the deal isn't going to work and they want to terminate. What happens next?
Right. So that can get a little close there, but they have until 5:00 on that last day of option period. So by 5:00, and really no matter the reason, whether it's due to inspections or just in general, they have till 5:00 to submit in writing that they would like to terminate the contract. And something I do want to mention is that if they do terminate, they have their earnest money. If they do it during the option period time, they get their earnest money back. However, it is minus the inspections.
And the option fee. The option fee
and the
stays.
Option fee, which is, like you mentioned, between $100 and $200. So there is some loss there.
Yeah. And the buyer's committed, they have a vested interest at that point because they've spent anywhere from $700 to $1,000 usually on inspections.
Right. And typically everyone, if you have a buyer that wants to buy and a seller that wants to sell, it moves forward.
Yeah.
We get it done.
Yeah. When you have a common goal like that, usually there's a way to make it work.
Yeah. So we can make it work.
Okay. All right. So the inspections are done. Everything has been agreed upon. We're moving forward. What is the next step in the process?
Right. So usually that is the appraisal. So the lender is working with the buyer to get documentation, but typically that buyer is waiting to see if it appraises. And that's a really big hurdle.
Yeah, because you don't want to order that appraisal till you're past the inspection period.
Right. Typically, and if you tell the lender, they will order it before the end of the option period, but you're spending money. So this is another expense that you're incurring.
Yeah. Right. And if you're going to terminate and you've spent more money, it's just not good.
So usually if you can get past that, and everyone can kind of take a deep breath, but you want the property to meet value, right? The agreed upon price. And typically, I've seen most of the time that does happen, but maybe it's even higher, right?
Which is great because you have some equity built in.
Some equity, so that's awesome. But you don't really want it to come under the amount of the sales price.
Right. That's when you have problems.
Right, and that's a whole nother podcast that we can go on. But once you get past the appraisal, it's just making sure that your financing is still in order with your lender and you still have approval. So, and then you'll make sure your interest rate is locked and all your documents are into your lender. So, And you're going to be, and then the other thing is the financing period. Let's talk about that for a minute, right? So typically that's 20 days.
Yeah, usually.
Usually 20 days. Sometimes they'll ask for 14, the seller will. But during that time, that's when you can back out if the financing doesn't go through.
Right.
Right. But I mean, most lenders now, I mean, they have a pretty good understanding of your, by now, your lender has a good understanding of your finances.
Yeah, they should have all your W-2s, tax returns, all that. They should know if you're going to be approved or not.
Right. And as long as you don't go out and buy a new car.
Yes, which is a whole nother podcast.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't make any big purchases.
Listen to your lender.
Yes, and your realtor for that matter.
And your realtor. Right.
So
during that time, if something does happen, you lose your job or, they move you to Alaska or something like that, you do have a period of time that you can back out and get your earnest money back. But that's still after inspections. So you still pay for what you've already spent. Right. But you can do that. But,
So after the appraisals happen, talk to me about what's next.
Well, we've got the survey. And so, we should be working on that to make sure that we have the survey and the survey is provided hopefully from the seller, right?
Yeah, if it's a resale property. Yeah.
Right. And then they can get that notarized and document that nothing's changed and present that to the title company because that we want that added in with the title, covered by the title insurance, right? But either the seller will provide that or possibly the buyer. They may purchase it, but that does take time. I mean, I've had it take like 10 days before.
Yeah, and money. It takes money too.
And money, and usually that can be sent to title, at least in this area, and you pay it at closing.
Yeah,
for the survey.
Around here, surveys are between $400 to $600 in a neighborhood for that type of property.
And then rural properties it's much more.
It's much more if you have acreage. Right. So keep that in mind if you're trying to decide what kind of property you want.
Right. So we got to get that survey turned in, and even for new construction, a survey is needed. So
every time on new construction.
Right. So you just having your realtor keep tabs with the listing agent on the repairs that are being done. That's another thing. Just checking to make sure that the AC's been fixed or whatever you've agreed on during inspection. So
okay. Well, that wraps it up for now. Next time we will be discussing what a buyer needs to expect at closing. Thank you, Latonya Button, for joining me today and for sharing your experiences with our listeners. We are very excited for the opportunity to share the real estate process with all of you. In future podcasts, we will be discussing selling your home, advertising your home, for sale by owners. So for sure, plan to join us. Always check out our other podcasts, and whenever you have a real estate question, give us a call. Thank you for joining us today on Real Estate Real Talk. Have a great day.